Hello, welcome to the Dailies, your breakfast show where we keep you updated with the happenings from the Nigerian newspaper. I am Sarah Elisha Dasham, and of course you will join us through Facebook and YouTube. Drop your comment, your views, because they are always welcome. I will be doing the program alongside Rachel Tansy. Good morning.
Morning, Sarah.
Morning, Rachel. All right, we will be going through the papers, starting with the Metrics newspaper.
The big story on the paper: declining oil production. NNPCL declares state of emergency. Says we have declared war on challenges affecting crude oil production. Reveals what's stopping Nigeria from conveniently producing 2 million barrels per day. Federal government to commission 12 new CNG stations on Thursday in Lagos and Abuja. You can find details on page 2. 1.09 trillion naira CBN's Anchor Borrowers Program falls under House of Representatives searchlight. You can start with the details on the front page. On Euro 2024, Dutch steamroll Romania as Turkey shock Austria. You can find details on page 16. 30% interest rate Dangote bombs CBN, says it will stifle growth, hinder job creation. Sokoto government moves against Sultan to strip him of power to appoint district heads. Federal government approves revised withholding tax regime, exempts small businesses, farmers, manufacturers, and others. Details can be found on page 9. Supreme Court shortlists 98 candidates for senior advocate of Nigeria position. CBN warns banks, BDCs against rejecting lower old dollar bills. You can find details on page 9. Civil servants leaking official documents will be jailed. Federal government warns. Details can be found on page 9. And we have Uzoma Onwardi from banker to farmer. Details can be found on page 14. A picture story: building a resilient manufacturing sector. Vice President Kashim Shettima receiving a plaque from the President of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, Francis, at the opening ceremony of a 3-day summit organized by the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria in Abuja yesterday. And that's all the news on the Matrix newspaper.
On Blueprint newspaper, there is no shortcut to Oroseya's report on MDA's restructuring. That is coming from reps. Hajj 2024 Ambassador Liman honored with key of Kaaba. And then we have Niger to commence construction of 5 billion naira NYSC orientation camp. More details found in the paper. And on Olympics, Wrestling Federation unveils 6 wrestlers for Paris. CBN's 30% interest rate stifling growth, job creation coming from Dangote. Concerns as NNPCL declares state of emergency on crude oil production. Join the war or be left behind, Kyari tells the IOCs. Those accusing Tinubu of marginalizing the North selfish, this is coming from Matawale, lists 30 key positions allocated to Northerners. Indian-born drug trafficker Obona backs 25-year jail. More detail of that can be found on page 10. Jigawa BOI signed 6 billion naira memorandum of understanding to fast-track SMEs. Coming from Anambra State, police recovered 3-month-old baby in front of school. And then we have on cholera, Lagos, Zamfara, Rivers, 7 others lead as death toll hits 63. More detail of that can be found on page 10. We have the picture story where we can see the president with other key holders during the Manufacturers Summit in Abuja. And that's all on Blueprint newspaper.
On the Daily Times newspaper, Benue senator dragged to court for ordering detention of driver for 2 weeks. Perspectives from Nigeria's war against LGBTQ+ individuals. Details you can be found on page 21. Dangote to Man Summit, no good will happen with 30% interest rate. Uni Abuja Ventures raises 50 billion naira for infrastructure development. The defense headquarters confirms 20 killed, 52 injured in Guazon multiple suicide bombings. Details can be found on page 2. The big story: state of the nation, food riots very eminent in Nigeria, warns Abakoba. Details can be found on page 2. SSANU to shut down varsities July 3rd over withheld salaries. Senators urges NIMED orders to make flooding information available timely. You can find details on page 18. And we have a picture story. National Emergency Management Agency distributing relief materials to fire disaster victims in Achika and Lamire Ward Garko Federal Constituency of Kano State. This happened yesterday, and that's all the news on the Daily Times newspaper.
On Leadership newspaper, high energy tariff, universities can generate own electricity coming from expert. Universities can generate own electricity coming from experts with the rider query capacities of engineering and water resources faculties. And then we can place average lower on special tariff. This is coming from Discos. You can find more detail of that on page 4. Senate to decriminalize non-use of national identity number. Federal government exempt farmers, manufacturers, SMMEs from withhold. We're still having the public service announcement coming from the Federal Ministry of Work, invitation to stakeholders engagement on the Renew Hope Legacy Road Infrastructure Project, which we see will be ongoing through July, first week of July precisely. So you can do well to look into that and more of the stories of interest to you in the paper. And that's all on Leadership newspaper.
On Nigerian Tribune, the big story, businesses can grow a 30% interest rate, Dangote tells federal government. Government working with man on new roadmap to improve manufacturing. A statement from Vice President Shetima. Details can be found on page 6. Federal government exempts farmer, manufacturers, small businesses from paying withholding tax. NNPCL declares state of emergency on crude oil production. Details can be found on page 7. Adopt July 13 as Wole Soyinka Day. Alake of Ibalaland advise federal government. Details can be found on page 26. Kano Emirship tussle cut to hear suit tomorrow. Federal government clears $850 million debt to EU airlines. Details can be found on page 13. Small workers protest, 1 dead, 12 suspects arrested, a report from police. 4-story building collapses in FCT tree rescued. NCDC registers 63 deaths, 2,102 suspected cases. This is concerning cholera outbreak. Details can be found on page 8. Bandits kill lecturer in Katsina, abduct his children. More details can be found on page 26. Parties knock Wike over thread on Kingibe. One FCT minister called to order. Ex-governor's attack is verbal violence coming from NNPP. More details can be found on page 10. Southeast governors to meet Tinubu over Nnamdi Kanu. Details can be found on page 2, and that's all the news on Nigerian Tribune.
On Vanguard newspaper, businesses won't survive at 30% interest rate, Dangote tells the federal government. You can find that on page 19. And we have the big news on the paper saying why prices of food items will soar higher. This is an investigation with the writers following it saying farmers list factors against food supply, lower prices, insecurity, transportation, taxes, late budget allocation release, and others fingered as some of the factors for why the food prices are high. Protest looms over hunger. This is a warning coming from Agba Kuba. And then also states need to get involved in reducing high food prices coming from the federal government. And this is not the first time we're seeing the reason why food prices are high. And I recall last week during the NEC meeting, we saw where President Tinubu was actually asking governors. He gave them 7 days precisely, which I believe should have elapsed by yesterday or today, to come up with some of the measures they have on ground to be able to curtail the issue of food prices and as well food production in their various states. And here we're seeing some of the factors that are responsible for why we are having food prices high. Just before we started the show, we're surprised at the prices of especially perishable goods such as the tomatoes, the pepper, carrots, and all of that. And we see that we saw that one of the factors, apart from the fact that it's very high, we're seeing that it's even scarce. So these are part of the factors that I think the government need to look into. What can they do? Already we are saying we cannot rule out the fact that the interest rate to the bank is high, and we will recall last year middle or so when we see that from experts are saying that people actually approach the bank not to get loan to actually start business, but to get loan so they'll be able to feed. So imagine if you're going to get a loan just so you can buy food stuff, and then the prices of goods, food precisely, is very high. You can actually tell what this means to Nigerians at a time like this. And we saw during the Democracy Day, people took it to the street to protest because of hunger and all of that. So I'm hoping that the 7 days that the president gave to the governor, they are able to come up with something tangible. And then as well, maybe we should revisit the issue of the palliative, the grace that the president promised. And then a number of states are yet to see that. So we look forward to see that approach as well, because really, Rachel, there is hunger in the land. We cannot deny that fact. There is hunger really presently.
Among the many factors that are affecting the surge in food prices, I think the one that could easily tackle the problem is the scarcity, because the exploitation is as a result of scarcity. So when you go and then there's a limited quantity available, people get exploited, because we talk left, right, center about how there's exploitation from the middleman. There's also expectation from the salesperson, that is the people you meet directly at the market and wherever you have access to the food that we consume on daily basis. And it's because there is scarcity of it is one of the major factors. If it were to be available, of course, we know that when it comes to marginal utility, law of demand and supply, of course, when you get to the peak of your satisfaction, because it's available, demand goes down, and then automatically you wouldn't be needing it anymore, and then the supplier have no other option but to, you know what, bring down their prices. Exactly, because they know it's no longer a do or die affair for the demander now in place and all of that. So I just hope that the availability, we are within the farming season, and I hope that as the president have tasked governors to improve food production. We saw where the Southeast governors had their forum, came out and said, you know what, we are going to make sure that we improve production of food in the country and all of that for our region and for our state. And then we will make sure that a lot of things will happen. I believe it's the Southwest governors, rather, their forum, the meeting they had last week, where they said we are going to improve food production. Now this should be seen across every region in the state, and say in the country rather, and say, you know what, we need to improve our farming. And for sure, we know that one way is off season. We don't have to wait till when the rain is falling before there is a huge production of food. And then security at your state level. I am looking forward to seeing a state governor that will go over and beyond, most especially for states that are prone to attacks in the area, particularly that you know that there is a large amount of farming activities happening. As a state governor, increase security at your own state level for these people to be able to farm. Assure them that there will be protection. Assure them that they can go to their farm and make it like that. When you promise, stick to your promise and fulfill it, so that for the season where there is, we can be able to have, let me put it as an abundance of farming and harvest and all of that, that will be able to take us through a certain period. And also, the government should take it seriously for those who are exploiting. You know, there used to be people in the market watching out and all of that. That should intensify, because we talk about exploitation left, right, center. That should be looked into seriously, because apart from these few challenges, we also have individuals taking advantage of the situation. True. And those people need to be watched, put to book, and then make sure that it doesn't happen and it doesn't spread eventually.
The Rachel, has been about 2 days or so, just metaphorically, where we saw FCC, PC going around again to actually check and regulate the prices. So I think in case they are resting, they should please wake up and start again. I know you brought my attention to the fact that where we saw the Southwest governors their meeting.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think early this year, we also saw Governor Bago of Niger State, where the president visited, because we know that that state is one of those states that has a very vast land. And then, just like you rightly mentioned, for those states that we know we can have massive production, the president, the government should look into that. Importantly, Rachel, we should improve our agric way of production, because we've been used to human way of doing things. We are not into mechanized farming in this country. We are backward when it comes to that. So imagine how much we'll be able to cultivate and produce if only we will go into mechanized farm. So I hope we'll also look into that aspect as well. Still on Vanguard newspaper, how public debt hit $91.46 billion despite generating $1 trillion in 40 years. This is still coming from Abaguba. You can find that on page 8. CBN to sanction banks for rejecting all small dollar denominations. You can find that on page 19. We have a column coming from Efe Babalola and also for sport. And we have the picture story here, Access Holding Right issue. They went during their last meeting on June 7th, so you can do well to look into the paper and read more detail of any other story that is of interest to you.
On the Punch newspaper, Tinubu seeks National Assembly's nod as tax regime begins January. Nigerians bought 16 trillion naira generators fuel in 2023, a report from the federal government. CBN threatens to sanction banks rejecting old dollar notes. More details can be found on page 32. On Borno bombings, military plan crackdown as reps begin probe. The big story, cholera, 33 states battle 2,102 cases as NYSC enforces strict camp rules. Lagos, Bayelsa, 8 others have 90% of cases as infections spread to 122 LGs. Federal government directs MDAs to patronize made in Nigeria goods. More details can be found on page 29, and I believe a picture story demonstrating that also. Dangote decries high interest rates, seeks government intervention. 5 to die by hanging for herders killing in Osun. You can find details on page 5. Southeast governors to meet Tinubu for Nnamdi Kanu's release. Details can be found on page 16, and that's all the news on the Punch newspaper.
On the Nation newspaper, government target passage of new tax law in the third quarter. States to get 90% VAT share. More detail found in the paper. It's impossible to create jobs with high interest on loan, says Dangote. Varsities face another round of disruption. That you can find on page 2. Declared June 13 Wale Soyinka Day. Alake urges the federal government. More detail found on page 29 of the Nation newspaper, and that's all on the Nation newspaper.
On Daily Sun newspaper, Southeast governors press for Nnamdi Kanu's release. Planned meeting with Tinubu over issues affecting region. The big story, fears in 33 states over cholera. Death toll hits 63, reps seek more action from federal government. 5 to die by hanging in Osun for murder of Fulani Heather. Terrorists kill varsity lecturer, abduct 4 others in Katsina. Details can be found on page 4. Sultan has no power to make appointments, says Sokoto government. Bayelsa Guba Appeal Court reserves judgment in APC Silva's appeal. Governor Dewey, Deputy INEC orders seek dismissal of appeal. More details can be found on page 22. Federal government exempts farmers, manufacturers, SMEs from withholding tax. Details can be found on page 22, and I believe that is a very good one from the federal government, trying by all means to create a conducive business atmosphere for Nigerians. Angry Ijaw youth shut down SEEPCO OPL oil field. Details can be found on page 8. Dangote falls CBN on implement of 26% interest rate. On the air crash, NAF brainstorm to reduce incessant mishaps. NAF brainstorm to reduce incessant mishaps. Details can be found on page 5. Fresh crisis looms in tertiary schools. SSANU begins strike over 4 months unpaid salaries tomorrow. More details can be found on page 6 and 27. Deseni estranged husband asked court to stop her from using her name. You can find details on page 4. We have picture stories where we can see Southeast Governor's forum meeting, and then Imo Governor Hope Ozundima, and then that of the non-executive director. From left to right, we can see the non-executive director, Access Holding PLC, alongside managing director, chief executive officer Roosevelt Obana, and company secretary, at the signing ceremony of Access Holding Rights issue 17 billion rather ordinary shares of 0.50 naira each at 19.75 naira per share, held at Access Tower in Victoria Island, Lagos. This happened yesterday, and that's all the news on Daily Sun newspaper.
On Daily News Herb newspaper, CBN's interest rate will kill existing businesses, Dangote cries out. Once it will make job creation a mirage, detail found in the paper. And on Borno attack, female suicide bombers imported. This is coming from Reps, says female terrorists recruited, brainwashed, brought from outside state to wreak havoc in Gaza. And then more than 180 critical injured receiving treatment. This is coming from the lawmaker as well. More detail concerning the Borno attack can be found inside the paper. Southeast governors to party federal government over Nnamdi Kanu as Obasanjo stormed the forum's meeting. Speaker Abbas calls the 10th Assembly high as reps introduced 1,351 bills, 679 motion and 89 draft legislature in 1 year. No tolerance for land grabbing in Ogun, Speaker assures aggrieved communities. Current National Assembly not representing Nigerians' interests, coming from the ex-APC Vice Chairman. National Assembly voice is loud, Senate replies Lukman. Alleged impeachment plot, Imo Assembly suspend 4 lawmakers. Estranged husband to court, stop ex-minister Danzani from using my name. Sultan lacks constitutional power to appoint anyone coming from the Sokoto government. We have declared state of emergency on oil production, coming from NNPCL, says it's strategy to increase crude production growth reserve. War means war. We have right tools. We know what to fight. Kyari is boasting about that. Tinubu approves new withholding tax policy, which you can find in the paper. We have the picture story showing us some of the Southeast governors. And that's all on Daily News Herb newspaper.
On First News, Dangote criticizes CBN's interest rate hike from 24% to 26%. Federal government exempts farmers, small businesses, manufacturers from withholding tax. Edo government demands return of 22 official vehicles from ex-deputy Governor Shaibu. NNPC Limited declares state of emergency on crude oil production. Cholera death toll rises to 63 across 33 states. The big story is Southeast governors rally for Nnamdi Kanu's release. Marathon meeting with Obasanjo fuels renewed efforts. High stake in energy, power sectors need 6 trillion naira annually for uninterrupted supply, report from the minister. Bandits kill lecturer, abduct children in Katsina. That's all the news on First News newspaper.
Right, let's take a look at Nigerian News Direct. Relief for SMEs as federal government adopts new withholding tax policy. More detail found on page 9. Sanwo-Olu commissions 10-story LBIC housing scheme as well. You can find that on page 29. Why federal government must consider private investment as national asset. Coming from Dangote, says foreign investors will only come when local investors are thriving. As Vice President Shetima harps on local content, more detail found on page 3. NNPC Limited blames procurement processes operators for declining crude production. Access Holding PLC holds signing ceremony for 351 billion right issue. And on cholera epidemic, 54 years of reoccurrences. Disease exposed Nigerians poor. preventive measure. You can find that on page 3, and that's totally true. And we have 2 picture stories which we can see. One is still talking about how the government is going to come into local production, and as well the other top one is looking at the signing coming from Access Bank Holding. And looking at the fact that, Rachel, here we're seeing that the vice president is putting so much pressure on local content. We see advice is given to ministries, department, and agency to patronize local, or let's say homemade things, Nigerian made goods. And I would like to ask a question that Nigerians will ask, Rachel. We always say leaders should start by example. And I clearly remember when the Senate purchased those SUVs, we asked, why didn't we purchase cars made in Nigeria? We have them. The goods, the food, and everything that we use, even starting to the fabric we use, they are not made in Nigeria. So what is the government doing? We saw where our textile industry is dying because nothing has been done to revive it so that we can have our own fabrics made here in Nigeria. And here we're also seeing, and I really love the dimension where we are seeing where there's Dangote saying the fact that foreign investors can only come in when local investors are thriving, and that is true. Let's look at the interest rate coming from the CBN. Let's also look at the fact that our multinationals are leaving, and leaving, pharmaceuticals are leaving. So right now we are left on our own. What is the government doing to improve all of this? And I love the fact that the president has made the move so that manufacturers, farmers, and other small entrepreneurs can thrive, you know, exempting them from withholding tax. But beyond that, what else can be done? Because I think it's a question that Nigerians would like to ask. What else can be done? Because it's one thing for you to say it, and I keep saying we're good in making beautiful and wonderful policies. When it comes to implementation, we are very, very poor. We're zero or nothing when it comes to it. So I'm hoping that when we see our government talking, let it start from the head, and let us make sure that there is a body that starts with the responsibility to see that all of these things are being implemented eventually.
Sally, we would even have a country where local businesses are thriving. We might not even need foreign investors and all of that.
Sure.
Because we will be sufficient enough for us to be able to cater for the need. There's a way these things work when you have an economy that is thriving and there's a good. We wouldn't need multinationals to be in the country to function. Rather, there'll be more like a franchise for whatever product that there is that we need. Because, of course, these companies don't give out their recipes just like that. Let me put it like that, for whatever. It could be technology, it could be gadgets, it could be skincare, it could be medicine, it could be just anything. But let me use that word like that. Let me use ingredient. Let me use the science. However it is, won't give it, except there's a company carrying their name. But then the Nigerian brand, the Nigerian franchise, the Nigerian the Nigerian version of it. Now, why we will thrive is because now we have everything in our shores. If, for example, a designer is coming to Nigeria, let me go for clothes, the one that will go for mass production, because every cloth line is it's a designer on its own. We can leave it like that on the basic. And you come to Nigeria, you are not bringing your textile to the country.
True.
Because we have our own. Why it's carrying your name is because it's your design. You are the one who designed this kind of shoe, this kind of jean, this kind of skirt, this kind of pepper on top, this kind of... That is why it carries your name. It is your ideology there. It is your original designs that are there. So it has to carry your name. But then the resources is in Nigeria, and then we are thriving automatically because we would have mineral resources. When you look at what are the ingredients for some of our cosmetics, are the mineral resources we are joking with. We're talking about talc, we're talking about copper, we're talking about zinc, we're talking about all the things that are being used in the products that we buy. These are minerals, these are plants that we are not taking our horticulture seriously. We are not taking every other thing. When all of these things are thriving, we might not even need investors. We might not need multinationals in the end of the day, because we will be able to thrive on our own. So I am looking forward to where the government is intentional about what they do. Despite seeing the president going left, right, center, wooing investors, we're yet to see them come, because the atmosphere is not good enough for them. They are folding up rather, and they are leaving. We're having Shell going, we're having Total Energies changing where they want to, because the oil production is no longer promising and all of that. We can pinpoint every place that is not functioning, is degrading, and then until we get them to the level where if we are functioning, we might not even need them and all of that. They will want to come, but they can't even come anymore, because when they come, it will even be bad market at the end of the day, because now it will affect the local manufacturers and businesses. And by living by example, Stella, I'm yet to see where the president will say, you know what, my official car will be, Sun and Motors and all of that. When we get there, then perhaps I would agree that we have gotten to the peak where made in Nigerian goods will really be approved, will be agreed upon, and then if the top is using it, I will be confident. If the president of Nigeria is using Innocent Motors, why would I, come on man, in Nigeria not go and buy the same vehicle for myself? At least it will have it in the book that we're driving the same car with Mr. President. That alone, we can move from there and grow eventually. But until we get there, I think we still have a long way to go regarding consuming our own made products.
Very long way, Rachel. But let us see how far we can go in this whole thing of leadership example.
Yeah.
Well, before we continue with the people review, we'd love to take a break. Quite a lot to chew. We're saying that the Southeast governors are meeting concerning the release of Nnamdi Kanu. Dangote is complaining about the new interest rate coming from the CBN, as that will choke, entrepreneurs, manufacturers, and coming up, looking at a number of things on the paper. So we would love to hear your own inputs about that. When we come back, we'll continue with the review. Please stay tuned with us.
Make your everyday informative, make your everyday count. Know your world, daily affairs, national and international, with authentic news events as they unfold on Global News and Zoom on Nigeria, Monday to Friday at 1 p.m.
Welcome back. It's still the Dailies. We have been looking at a number of stories, and before we went on break, we said you can actually contribute your own quota concerning what do you feel about Dangote talking about, the new interest coming from the CBN, as that will choke manufacturers and upcoming entrepreneurs and small businesses. As well as we're seeing that the Southeast governors are meeting to actually party with the federal government on the release of Nnamdi Kanu. And then as well, we're seeing that when it comes to oil production, there needs to be a state of emergency concerning that, because our quota is dropping, drastically, and something needs to be done about that. So we would love to hear your own inputs concerning that. I still have Rachel Tenzi with me. Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome, Sally.
All right, let's go to with the paper review, please.
On New Telegraph, the big story: Senate steps up move to decriminalize non-use of NIN. as Bill of Repeal Reenactment of National Identity Management Commission 2024 passes second reading. Details can be found on page 3. Again, CBN threatens to sanction banks over rejection of all denominations of the dollar. You can start with the details on the front page. Federal government seeks man's advice on ways to revive manufacturing sector. The question is, if they give the advice, are you willing to accept and act on it? You can find details on page 4. Senate approves Kalu's motion on flood maintenance. Details can be found on page 4. NNPC Limited declares state of emergency on crude oil production. Nigerians spend 16.5 trillion naira on self-generated electricity. LPPC shortlist Ubani Edun Tinubu's lawyer, 95 others for SAN rank. More details can be found on page 7. Cholera death toll rises to 63, report from NCDC. Failed impeachment, Imo Assembly suspend 4 lawmakers. In 2024, federal government to empower 5,000 core members with 10 million naira grant each. Soldiers, 2 other security agents among 20 dead in Borno weekend suicide attacks, a report from the Defense Headquarters. Still on the paper, reps passed bill to create a TT state in the southeast to probe exploitative practices against airpeace Dangote by foreign coins and others, urges Mahi to revoke Exit West Road contract over poor execution. Details can be found on page 4, 5, and 8. Tinubu enjoys rock-solid support in the North, statement from the Defense Minister. Study links disinfectant chemical to shrunken heads in newborns. More details can be found on page 31. That's all the news on New Telegraph newspaper.
On the Guardian newspaper, proposed merger rattle MDA's lobbying in testify at the National Assembly. Details found on page 6. Cholera toll hit 63 deaths, 2,102 cases in 33 states. Sultan lacks the power to appoint anyone, Sokoto government declares. National Assembly spineless, a rubber stamp, says the ex-PGF DG Lukman. Nigerians spent 16.5 trillion naira, 60% of 2024 electricity budget on generators. More detail found on page 5. And this is a question where Nigerians would like to ask, how is the federal government intending to turn this money back to revenue by making sure they make electricity available? Federal government rolls out fresh withholding tax regulations. Detail found on page 15. And on Unity School DPECO, how 1,800 teachers got employed but unpaid for 36 months. This is a news analysis you can find on page 4, and that's all on the Guardian newspaper.
On this day newspaper, Mele carry to IOC, Nigeria will produce its oil, won't wait for you. GCEO declares state of emergency on crude production, delay in concluding divestment detrimental to Nigeria, says producers. Adelabu seeks full commercialization of power sector to ensure survival. Details can be found on page 5. Southeast governors presses for economic integration in Nnamdi Kanu's release. Federal government issues fresh regulation on deduction of withholding tax at source. A statement from Oyedele, new regulations to exempt SMEs from withholding tax, supply of Jet A1, CNG, PMS, Argo orders to attract zero deductions. More details can be found on page 10. Federal government seeking policy framework roadmap to revamp manufacturing sector, seeks prioritization of local content made in Nigeria goods. Dangote falls CBN's over 26% interest rate. LCCI comments Apex Bank's removal of price verification system. A picture story that has been on most of our paper, pushing for regional security and economic integration of Southeast, where we can see the Southeast governors. And that's all the news on this day newspaper.
All right, let's take a look at Sweet Crook reports, where we have Finima Community Picket NLNG trained 7 contractors, alleges 5 CD JV flouting the NDGICD Act. More detail found in the paper. Nigerians 2.2 BSCF OB3 gas project for completion in August, and we have Namasa to replace foreign seafarers with qualified Nigerian sailors commence third phase of the NSDP. More detail found inside the paper. And we have NMDPRA reiterates commitment to statutory mandate, says no dirty fuel in Nigeria. This has been the conversation since last week, and that's all the Sweet Creek reports.
On Nature News, Nigerians oppose GMOs, Stella maize. You can find the opinion poll on page 3. Deaf partners launch initiatives for Africa's blue and green economy. Don laments 8 million tons, 8 M tons annual agri-food waste in Nigeria. Details can be found on page 5. Polaris partners NCF on Ogun reforestation project. African Development Bank secures $18 million GEF funding for e-waste MGT. Details can be found on page 8. A fact check: is organic farming better for the environment than conventional farming? NYSC vows to combat deforestation through tree planting in Adamawa. Kamik tax communities businesses on waste recycling. Details can be found on page 5. Girmay becomes first black African to win Tour de France stage. Details can be found on page 20. That's all the news on Nature News.
On the Business Times newspaper, CBN threatened to sanction banks and others for rejecting all lower dollar bill denomination. Reps probe CBN 1.12 trillion naira anchor borrower scheme, Nasel 215 billion naira loan. Detail found on page 4. How to stop investors from leaving Nigeria, attract new ones coming from Dangote. Since the current 30% interest rate on bank loan is stifling growth, won't allow anyone to create jobs. Federal government fine-tunes withholding tax, grant exemption to farmers and SMEs. World Bank sees global growth stabilizing at weak pace, and then we have federal government raises 4.13 trillion naira to finance 2024 budget in the first half of 2024. Shetima demands prioritization of local content made in Nigerian goods. Says Nigeria has no better option than to support its indigenous firms to produce locally and increase their capabilities. Says Nigeria has no better option than to support its indigenous firms to produce locally and increase their capabilities. More detail can be found on page 2, and that's all on Business Times newspaper.
On Punch Sport Extra, Aruna for $250,000 WTT star contender Bangkok. Odega Oneme excluded from Falcons Olympic squad. Osimhen to begin preseason with Napoli. Gakpo inspired Dutch book last 8 spot, where we have Netherlands winning 3-0 against Romania. Tijani targets 20 goals at Plymouth. Details can be found on page 7. Greenwood Sancho out of United preseason. Madrid interested in Saliba. Details can be found on page 3. Chelsea signed £30 million Dewsbury Hall. You can find details on page 4. Future star Abdulrahman, Norway talent eyeing global stage. Andy Murray out of Wimbledon singles. Details can be found on page 8. Africa Men's Sevens Rugby Federation drum support for Stallions. More details can be found on page 2. The big story: free men. What next for out-of-contract Nigerian stars in summer transfer market? A question. You can find answers inside the paper. And that's all the news on Point Sport Extra.
Well, that's how far we can go on the program this morning. Thank you, Rachel, for
You're
doing
welcome,
this.
Sally.
And also thank you to our viewers, our supporters, and to the entire crew member for making this program a success. We look forward again to doing this tomorrow. To have a great day ahead.